Good morning and welcome to the 9:30 call here on Thursday, January 16th. Um, if you've been paying attention, you know tonight is the State of the Commonwealth address that the governor will give. I'm going to put you can watch it online. You can watch it. I think the networks will still run it. It's the legislature will actually come in session at 6 p.m. If you've ever watched it, both the House and the Senate are in their chambers. They create committees to go get the governor. They come back. They say the governor's on her way. The governor comes in. Everything will be in the House chamber. So, as we talked about, there's 200 legislators, 160 of the reps will be sitting in their seats, and then they add extra seating for the 40 senators to come in. And then the governor will give her address. And as we talked about, her budget will come out next Wednesday, but we are expecting to hear a preview in this budget in this address to hear what she'll be thinking about for her budget that will be released next week. Um, and in an incredible circumstance, I got invited to go. So I will be in the overflow room in the Great Hall. So they have kind of the main actions in the House chamber, and then they have the overflow room. But I'm excited to go. So stay tuned. Look out for selfies. But we're so excited to have our guests with us today, Frannie and Kelly. It's great to see you. Welcome to the 9:30 call. And as we start the call, we would love for you to start with our first question that we ask everybody is for you each to tell us a little bit about you, how you came to be in your current role, and then we're excited to hear about your tool.
Yeah, thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here. Franny has talked this up a lot as an attendee. I'm Kelly Etter. I'm the Vice President of Early Childhood Equity Initiatives at the Policy Equity Group. And I'm so happy just to share a bit of my core story. And really, I think about all the places, like literally, that I've been. And I think for me, it all started like many children in a childcare center. But for me, it was under a desk in the front office. My mom was the director of a childcare center for many, many years. I thought it was so cool. My mom worked at a place where like play and discovery were centered, where everyone loved children. But on days that I didn't have school, I would often kind of be like under her desk reading or drawing. And as you can imagine, I heard some stuff. Like that was a fly on the wall experience for just really like a parade of joy and struggle that families and teachers were bringing in every day. And I think it was there that I didn't realize it at the time, but I was internalizing that caregiving and raising children is such a collective responsibility that's really complicated, but at the same time, really, really crucial. So that's where it started. I think I took that and throughout my kind of more formal learning experiences, the library was always where I was in the like dusty corner of child development resources in college and graduate school. But that's definitely where I was. The kind of like basement research labs, again, where kind of child development and early childhood were relegated. And then, going on, worked in DC, so was in more fancy places like the fancy halls of policymakers for a few years, but then went back into the classroom. During my graduate training, I spent a lot of time, at literal tables with families and with teachers as a school psychologist and early childhood mental health consultant. And then I think, where I most think about myself is crouched down on the floor with kiddos, right? So as a teacher, as a child therapist, now as a parent, I spend a lot of time getting a different perspective from that floor. And when I think about kind of all of these experiences woven together, the thread that really just stands out is what we know is possible for young children and their caregivers and what the realities are. And so, in my current role with Policy Equity Group, I've kind of returned to that kind of childhood space of imagination and really trying to reimagine and rebuild systems. So Franny and I have worked the last couple of years on we call it the Knock It Down series. For a while, we were like, should we just burn everything down? Like things are not working. But we came to this realization that it's not a complete, destruction, it's a reconstruction, using pieces that are in place, but to build something better. And so I think about blocks as kind of that metaphor, which you'll see
Yeah.
in the presentation today. So with that, I'll turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Frannie.
Thanks so much, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly. It's great to be here. It's hard to follow Kelly when she tells her story, I'm going to be honest. But to be honest, my introduction to early care and education, and I should say I'm a senior director of policy at Policy Equity Group, and my introduction to early care and education policy was actually working in Congress for a Massachusetts member, Catherine Clark.
You may have
And
heard of her. Yeah.
yeah. And I actually learned a lot from you, Amy, and you were kind of my first mentor and tutor in early care and education advocacy. And before that, I had been really engaged in public health, and I just fell in love, truly, with the world of early care and education. And to me, it felt like the linchpin, if we could solve this, if we could solve the challenges facing this sector for the workforce and for families, it would be such a game changer for families, women in the workplace, and our whole society. And so I actually left the Hill because I wanted to become a subject matter expert in early care and education, which is how I kind of meandered over to Policy Equity Group. And it's funny because it was sort of a surprise for me to land in ECE, but it actually makes a lot of sense. My mom was also a child care teacher,
Wow.
and which I don't talk about enough, actually, Kelly. And but she also raised six of us, and we had like the most joyful, wonderful childhood because of her. And so I think a lot about how my job now is to try and make sure every child has the childhood I had because that was such a privilege, and everyone deserves that. So, and I'm just mostly here, honestly, to celebrate Kelly's amazing work. So I'm probably going to be quiet the rest of this time, and I'm just so happy to be here and back with my Massachusetts people. So thank you for having me.
I have to say that question is such an amazing way to start conversations, but thanks to both of you for for sharing as much as you did. And I'll just say, Franny, I think, when you came to the NAYC Public Policy Forum and, you were on a panel, but then you kind of mixed and mingles with the people. We had brought a team of students from it was BU Wheelock, and they were just blown away that they were talking to a member of Commerce staff person who was like a real person and down to earth and kind of stayed to hear about the rest of the form. And I just think it's so powerful to think about kind of how people learn, like to learn from Catherine Clark, what an incredible platform. But now to kind of take all that experience to become a content expert. We will be kicking off our first year tour, our meet and greet with our first year legislators. So we invite them all to come to the 9:30 call. And it's incredible. And I'm just so glad you said that, Franny, because these are the content experts on this call, right? We are the people that can be helpful and supportive. So thank you for that. And Kelly, I'll turn things over to you.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to pull up my presentation, though really I wish that we were all in a room together, because this is really meant to be like a very hands-on. We're talking about how people learn. I think just like children, adults learn hands-on, right? So this is meant to be kind of a thing that you might do with policymakers, with other advocacy groups. We've been doing a lot of work with economic development organizations, and so this has been really powerful. Because again, like trying to break the box of kind of how we usually talk about things and really trying to innovate and think about things
Yeah.
a little bit differently. And so this is just kind of a screenshot of the facilitator guide, which I think the link was in the material sent out, but we can definitely send it out again. But kind of explains like the purpose of this. We call it an interactive game, but really to put people in the shoes of families, childcare owners, and educators to really understand like we always say like it's the money, the money that's broken, the financing system, but this really tries to make that concrete instead of this abstract of like, we need more money. It really helps to break down why, and showing people that the math just does not add up, right? So families are paying too much, teachers are making too little, and it really, I think, helps makes the case that this should be an investment in the public good. So if you are in a room with people, you would ask people to be in groups of at least three, and you would ask people to kind of take on these roles. Like you'll be the family, you'll be the business owner, you'll be the teacher. So to really kind of help them build that perspective, empathy. But of course, if the groups are bigger than three, that's fine. They can work as a team. What you need is blocks. But if you don't have those, like pieces of candy work great, coins, but just kind of 26 of something for each group. And each block or like small item is going to represent $25,000, which is kind of important to keep in your mind. Each group gets these kind of worksheets to have in front of them, and I'll show you those. We're going to kind of run through it. And then, in the facilitator guide is kind of a script that is pretty turnkey, and you can kind of go through. You can adapt it if you need to. Yeah, so I think we'll start. And because we're not all in a room, I am going to ask you all to kind of, try to use your imagination and pretend like you're going to take on one of these roles. And so, just kind of if your birthday first few months of the year, January through April, you'll kind of be thinking as a family member. May through August, you'll kind of take on that business owner role, and September through December, the teacher role. So just kind of hold that in your mind so you can kind of see how it would work if you were doing this in person. But the first thing that you do is you give people their sheets, and you're going to kind of guide them through moving the blocks, which are your money. And so you would say to the person who's representing the family, you would say, your family consists of two working adults, a preschooler and an infant. And each adult in your family earns $50,000. So that's a combined household income of $100,000 per year. Okay. So you're going to have them move 4 blocks, each representing 25,000, onto the household income sheet. And we designed this initially in Michigan, but we could customize it for different states. And it's $100,000 per household is about a living wage, at least in Michigan. But now we're going to talk about your expenses, right? So for a family of four, it's going to be about 12,500 for food and another 12,500 for taxes. So move a block over there to cover that. And then the combined cost of like housing, utilities, basic necessities, like clothing is another 25K. So move that from your income sheet. Transportation, healthcare costs are another 25,000. And finally, for an infant and a preschooler, the combined annual childcare tuition is 25,000. So you're going to move your final block over there, and you can kind of highlight for people that, childcare is the single largest household expense, right, out of this whole list. And even though our federal definition of affordable childcare is about 7%, or less, childcare for this family is about a quarter, 25% of their budget. And this isn't uncommon for many families. And think about if you were a single income family, but still had to pay the same in childcare tuition, this proportion is going to be even greater. So families are really making tough choices about, which bills can be paid. So then we're going to move over to our childcare business owner, right? It's a little bit more complicated here. But you're going to kind of ceremoniously have one of the family members like pass their block to the childcare business owner. And yeah, so we're going to talk about like a childcare center business budget and keep it simple, because we know that kind of the makeup of childcare centers is complex, but we're going to just say you serve 24 families, and each one just has an infant or toddler and a preschooler. Okay. And so here's where, you would get a block from the family member as kind of that ceremonious transfer of tuition payment. And then we're going to move all of our blocks over to kind of our revenue sheet, right? Because you're collecting from each family $25,000. And so you'll notice, each infant classroom or toddler classroom serves 8 children, 2 teachers. So kind of combined total of 125,000. And so at this program, you happen to have 3 infant or toddler programs, each generating about 125,000 each. And then, of course, our preschool classroom is going to be larger. But the tuition is less, so it's going to be about 225,000. Um, yeah, so this is really you want to think about accommodating lower ratios. This is where you can kind of explain
Right.
why we need lower ratios for infants and toddlers. Um, but really, that programs are often operating as a loss because really to cover the teacher salaries and stuff, you would want to charge a lot more. But so really, programs are relying on that preschool tuition to kind of offset the cost of infant toddler care. Um, yeah, so then you would kind of go on to explaining the expenses, right? And so of the $600,000 in program revenue, 25K is spent on mandatory benefits. So this is like workers' comp and social security. This isn't things like healthcare. This is just kind of the bare minimum. And then usually about 50K could be spent on occupancy. So this might be rent, or lease, mortgage, sort of about 2 blocks over there. Another 50K for food, supplies. Um, and then the operations costs is, things like insurance or permits, office supplies, utilities, things like that is about 75K. But really, all of that put together is only a third of the budget, right? And the remaining 400,000 goes to staff wages. And this is true for most programs, like average spent on compensation is between 60 and 80% of a program's budget. Okay, so that's if you were kind of the business owner. And then finally, we're going to go to the teacher perspective, right? And so the
Mm.
business owner is going to kind of pass this over to the person who's representing the teaching staff. And so they're going to get 16 blocks from the payroll section of the budget. And you can explain that even though most of a program's budget is spent on personnel, childcare is really labor intensive, right? And costs spread out quickly. So from the payroll allocation, you're going to get 6 blocks for kind of the administrative staff salaries, so director, assistant director, maybe a part-time admin assistant. And then these last 10 blocks over here are going to go to teacher salaries. So you're going to have two teachers per classroom, right? And then 2 floater teachers to support teacher breaks and maintaining ratios during the program's often like 10-hour day. So each teacher gets 1 block, right? $25,000. And at this point, I would kind of ask, wait a minute, can our family representative, do you remember what living wage was for one adult? It was double that, right? For a family of 4, you should be making about 50,000. And so this is really, illustrating that childcare teachers are often making poverty level wages, and childcare is often one of the lowest paid professions in every state and for sure our country. A significant percentage of childcare teachers often struggle to afford housing, experience food insecurity, um, and rely on some form of public assistance just to make ends meet because of these low salaries. And, we see a lot of economic insecurity and the stress contributing to high rates of burnout, with often up to 40% of the childcare teachers leaving jobs every year. And this staff turnover is going to, in turn, affect young children who really thrive on consistent caregiving relationships. And it also makes it difficult for business owners, childcare business owners, to operate at full capacity with these staffing shortages. So just kind of showing like the economic impact and impact on the relationships and things that these low teacher salaries have. Um, and so the final phase to kind of wrap up, pointing out, like as we saw, like the math just does not add up. So, now we're going to have to make some tough choices. So I want to turn back to those representing the teachers and say, as we just saw, you're only making half of what's considered a living wage. And this isn't okay. Like, this is unacceptable, especially given your vital role in supporting children's brain development, families' ability to work, and kind of overall economic prosperity. So you have a choice here. You can tell your childcare business owner if you're going to A, pursue a higher paying job in a different field, or B, ask them to increase teacher salaries to a living wage. And so think about what the teacher representatives, and I'd be a little bit curious if you'd put in the chat if you would go option A or option B, if you were a teacher. So feel free to pop that in. Um, and then I would turn to the childcare business owner and say, regardless of what your teachers are deciding to do, you do want to raise salaries to a living wage, so to $50,000, so that you can either retain and or attract staff to your program. But to do this, you need another 10 blocks, right? $250,000 to add to just your payroll. But this is more than all of your other expenses combined. So you need to increase your revenue by 42%. And so to do that, now you have two choices. You can either convert all infant toddler classrooms to preschool slots, so you're decreasing the already limited infant toddler supply in your community. But that's one viable option to get teacher salaries up. Or you can raise tuition by $10,417 for each current family. Um, right. So again, like pop in the chat, which if you were a business owner, which one you would do. And then as the business owner, you also now need to tell the families in your group whether they need to find other care for their infant because you've decided to convert everything to preschool slots, or pay another tenth of their income to you in tuition. And then lastly, we're kind of full circle back to the families now. And so, look at your expense sheet and think about if you want to, A, find a way to increase your childcare allocation. So either cut other expenses or take on an additional job to increase income. And remember, this was tight already, like there was
Right.
no slush fund. Or option B, one parent can leave the workforce and stay home with the children. So again, if you're a family, if you want to pop that into the chat about what you would do in that circumstance. But really, like, here's where people like are getting like visibly frustrated with you because they're sitting in that of like, I don't have enough blocks. And, we tried to balance this equation out, right? We tried to have financial security for both families and teachers. But again, like the math just doesn't add up. Our current system is failing everyone. And as, Marcy Whitebook and other childcare advocates have said, parents can't afford to stay, teachers can't parents can't afford to pay, teachers can't afford to stay. There's got to be a better way. And really, I think the better way has to come in the form of increased investment from both the private and the public sector. So that's a little run through of the follow the money game. Happy to take questions. I want to put our contact info up, and we can definitely send this.
I think even though we weren't in the room and we have worked over the past 4+ years to build community online, like that was powerful just to see. But I can imagine if you're holding a block, how, much more powerful. There's a lot of appreciation in the chat for how impactful. Marie Bossy shares like this has been her 20 years of her like making these difficult decisions at different places. And Kelly, this reminds me in 2006, a group of us wrote a skit and I'm going to put it in the advocacy headquarters for the 930 callers. But it basically was those three. It was a parent, an administrator, and a teacher's perspective. And we wrote the songs, the Itsy Bitsy Paycheck, and it was called The More We Get Together. But I think part of the challenge, and we've talked about this a lot on this call, is making all of these things that we talk about real. Like we wanted people to share their sample budgets, but we know that's hard because just like you said, it's not like directors are holding money or they're doing the math wrong. The math is, that it doesn't add up. And so we've talked about how a lot of the language you shared was like, I wish I had more blocks, like see these difficult decisions I'm making. Um, So can you talk a little bit about Paula added the question in the chat. Have you played this game with elected officials or politicians? Like, how have you seen this used out in the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have not yet played with elected officials. Well, we did a version of this actually at a legislative summit in New Mexico. It wasn't this exact, but it was a very similar kind of
Yep.
thing, and it was very well received. That it was kind of you see these light bulbs go on.
Right.
Largely, we've used it again, like with economic development organizations who are very much, their language is kind of the business and the finance. And,
Right.
initially they come to the problem with like, well, directors just don't know how to manage their money, kind of a thing. And so like, let's offer them business training. And we're kind of like, can you balance these books?
Right.
And so those are two communities that we have played it with that has just like really illuminated things for them.
We've also talked about, I don't know if Kate Warren Barnes is on the call, but she said, like, wouldn't it be powerful to have a legislator or an elected official to work a full day in a program and then kind of get the check that you would have gotten kind of like for that day's work. Because I think we've heard this from elected officials too. Like, what are the numbers? Because just saying we don't make wages, like but to understand how that family needed 4 blocks and a teacher's getting 1 block is pretty powerful.
Yeah, the
Um,
other thing that maybe we could share at some point too, but another thing we did at the legislative summit, so again with policymakers, was go through, we had just like a very simple scenario of like pretend you're a teacher. Your only job is to remember these 3 kids' names and who has a nut allergy. Um, and then we like would increase the ratio and give them all of these cognitive demands that like, okay, now here's, 3 things you can do during a read aloud, and here's what you're thinking about in terms of higher education, and see how much they could cognitively recall of
yeah,
like, can you remember just those 3 kids' names after
right.
doing it? So it was kind of like you're saying about putting them in the shoes without actually doing that.
Well, and I think, every when you think about education, people think, oh yeah, I went to school, I know school, or I have a child, so we often see too, it's hard to take their personal experience and like think about policy in that way. Just because I think and the stress that you talked about, I think is so real. Like, how does that weigh in? The other thing, in Massachusetts, we do have $475 million and it was a federal funding stream that now the state has taken over, which is incredible. Um, and it would be interesting to even add a C3 block to say, like, this block is helping us this much, but we need 3 more of these blocks to really get to where we want to get to. So I guess that would be my last question at 10 a.m. How do you show the interplay of like the private dollars and the public dollars? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, like blocks are like a physical, tangible thing could be
Right,
really powerful. We've also used blocks to model kind of like cost of quality studies and how
right.
it doesn't quite work to do a per child allocation, even with a cost of quality. Talk about like
Exactly.
anger at
Right.
not having enough blocks. So yeah, we haven't, but I think that would be a really interesting thing to take on. And I know the Buffett Institute in Nebraska is working on some kind of fiscal mapping of those, and they have some cool online tools.
But I think even like as a practical thing, as a director who's trying, like, because we've had many discussions about, do you take government funding? What does that look like? What are the eligibility requirements? What are the kind of qualification requirements once you do? So I think that's because so much of our education funding is flipped, right? It's much more public funding and less um, so I think that might be interesting to think about. And then Tom Weber wondered, like, could you make this an online game? Oh, and Donna Danette says, our nonprofit boards need this. That would be another audience to play
I
the
love
game
that.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
Kelly, Franny, you got to come back. We're
we
not
will.
done.
We would love to come back anytime. And
Yeah,
yes, like this is, I think the dream would be to make it an online thing so you can have both, and the PowerPoint of like our prototype for that, I would say. But
right.
yeah, I think that would be
We
cool.
could
So
start branding blocks, with subtle advocacy messages. Um, No, we would love to have you back anytime. We recorded this call. If you can send me, we have an follow-up folder where we put links and things. So
Yeah,
any kind of links that we did share some in the invite, but whatever would be helpful for folks. And then I think we'll do a 9:30 call on the skit because I mean, it was such an easy way to get to some of these, everyone told a different story, and the moral of the story is that we all have to work together to find a better way.
yeah,
Um,
I love
well,
it.
thank you both for coming. And yes, so if you send me the slides and the links, everyone's very excited about the PowerPoint and the game. So send me the pieces. We'll put them in our follow-up folder, and please come back anytime. We would love.
Happily.
Oh, thanks so much. And we
You.
will. We don't have the 9:30 call tomorrow, but let me see who's coming on the 9:30 call on Monday here at 10:03. We are closed on Monday. Thank God I looked. On the 21st, we'll have EE Commissioner Amy Kershaw. The board meeting was yesterday. And then we'll also have Danielle Ewan, who's going to come once a month for the federal update. And then we're going to hear from Joe Kreisberg, who is the director of Mass Inc., which is actually where Strategies is now housed in their office. So stay tuned for next week. Have a great weekend. We will see everybody next week. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Oh, and I'll send you the chat too, Kelly and Franny.
Oh,
Yes.
awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you.